House numbers feel boring, but they change government more than most people usually realize. A number on a door is not just for visitors, it makes a place readable to power. This is not really a story about signs, it is a story about administration itself. It is about how states learn to see cities, record them, and enter daily life. Before house numbers, addresses were messy, local, and filled with human guesswork. People described places through landmarks, memory, neighbors, and familiar nearby buildings. The baker near the church was enough when everyone shared the same local map. The blue house behind the fountain also worked when strangers were still uncommon. The widow by the market was a usable address in smaller and slower communities. That system worked in places where most people already knew each other somehow. But it failed in growing cities, and it failed even more for centralized governments. A state cannot manage millions of people through vague descriptions and local memory alone. It needs stable reference points, places that strangers can identify without asking around. That is where house numbers became revolutionary, even if they looked simple outside. They made urban space countable, searchable, and useful for administration at scale. Once a building has a fixed number, it can be entered into records and files. And once it enters records, it becomes easier to tax, inspect, map, and monitor. That sounds minor, but it changes how a city is understood by institutions. A street stops being just a social place and becomes an ordered sequence instead. A neighborhood stops being a blur of corners, families, memory, and old landmarks. House numbers belong to that bargain at the center of modern urban life. That shift matters because governments do not rule only through laws and speeches. They also rule through systems that make people and places visible to administration. Visibility is power, not dramatic power, but durable power that repeats every day. It is the kind of power that can be filed, checked, enforced, and scaled. Imagine a tax collector arriving in a city without clear numbers on houses. The address is vague, the route is uncertain, and the whole process slows down. A letter carrier has to ask around, and a census worker needs local guides. Everything becomes slower, more fragile, and more dependent on personal interpretation overall. That gives the state weaker reach because it cannot verify what it cannot locate. As cities expanded, this older way of finding people started breaking down fast. Urban growth creates strangers, and strangers create serious information problems for governments. The bigger the city becomes, the less local memory can hold everything together. At that point, administration needs infrastructure, not only roads and pipes, but information. House numbers are part of that invisible infrastructure that organizes urban life. They turn a confusing city into a system outsiders can navigate with confidence. That includes postal workers, but also police, soldiers, inspectors, and health officials. So numbering houses did not only improve convenience, it expanded state capacity directly. Government becomes stronger when it no longer depends on neighborhood memory alone. It becomes stronger when an official can arrive with a list and exact address. That sounds trivial, but small efficiencies become powerful when repeated thousands of times. One successful visit becomes standard procedure, and standard procedure becomes administration. Administration then becomes a quiet kind of authority that rarely looks dramatic. This is the deeper pattern of modern government, where power becomes less personal. Instead of knowing people directly, institutions know them through records and categories. Instead of remembering places socially, they locate them through formal administrative systems. House numbers fit perfectly into that transformation from memory to administration. They connect geography to paperwork, and that is a much bigger change. A place without a fixed administrative identity is harder for the state to govern. A place with one can be integrated into larger systems of control and service. Think about taxation, which needs more than laws, rates, and financial rules. It also needs reliable targets because officials must know which households actually exist. Who lives where matters because government cannot collect from invisible households effectively. Which building belongs to whom matters because ownership must attach to something concrete. Which address should receive notice matters because enforcement depends on successful delivery. Without clear numbering, collection is weaker, slower, and easier to avoid altogether. Ambiguity protects ordinary people, while clarity usually helps institutions more than residents. The same logic applies to conscription and military service in earlier states. If government needs to find eligible men, it needs addresses that actually work. Not poetic directions, not the third house near the old tree, but fixed locations. House numbers help states move from general orders to specific practical enforcement. Once governments understood that, numbering stopped being cosmetic and became administrative. It became part of a wider revolution in how societies were organized and managed. This is why systems history matters, because change often hides inside routine tools. Societies do not change only when kings fall, empires collapse, or wars begin. They also change when information becomes easier to organize and easier to compare. House numbers are one of those quiet tools that compress complexity into manageable form. Cities are full of tangled lives, rented rooms, workshops, subtenants, and hidden households. But a numbered address creates an entry point, a handle into complexity itself. And governments love handles because handles make intervention much easier to perform. A notice can be delivered because a specific door can now be identified. A resident can be registered because paperwork can now point somewhere exact. A rule can be enforced because officials can locate the proper household directly. Sanitation can be inspected because the inspection target no longer stays ambiguous. Property can be recorded because ownership now connects to a numbered location. Fines can reach the right door because the city is easier to read. That is another hidden effect of house numbering. Agencies can share one language. The Postal Service, Tax Office, Police, and Census Bureau can match one location. That consistency is incredibly valuable for administration because consistency is what scales. The modern state depends on shared reference systems that reduce departmental confusion. Without them, agencies operate in fragments and information gets stuck in silos. With them, information circulates, and control becomes more regular and continuous everywhere. This matters especially during public health crises, when speed and precision matter most. During an outbreak, officials need to know where cases are, not approximately, but exactly. Which building matters first, because location determines how fast intervention can begin. Which entrance matters too, because crowded cities often hide multiple households together. Which cluster is forming matters, because outbreaks spread through proximity and repetition. Which households nearby face risk matters, because delay turns infection into expansion. House numbers make targeted intervention possible in a crowded and fast-moving city. Authorities can isolate a location, inspect it, clean it, and monitor spread. Again, the number on the wall looks small, but it changes crisis response. It makes a city more readable under pressure, and readable cities are easier to manage. Readability is one of government's hidden obsessions because readable populations are governable. They are easier to count, easier to tax, easier to regulate and rescue. That last part matters because these systems are not only about coercion, they also make useful services possible, and that is why the trade-off is real. Ambulances need addresses because speed disappears when responders must search by memory. Fire brigades need addresses because confusion can turn a small fire catastrophic. Utility repairs need addresses too, especially when service networks fail under pressure. Emergency response becomes faster when every location can be identified without confusion. So this is not a simple story where numbering is bad and obscurity good. It is a story about trade-offs because every coordination system expands institutional reach. The same system that helps a doctor find your home can help officers too. The same system that delivers medicine can also deliver fines and surveillance. Modern administration usually works like that, solving real problems while extending power. House numbers belong to that bargain at the center of modern urban life. We gain order, speed, clarity, and services, but we lose some obscurity. That loss of obscurity is historically important, even if it happened very quietly. For much of history, ordinary people could disappear into local complexity more easily. Not vanish completely, but remain partly blurred to distant centralized institutions. House numbering helped reduce that blur, and that changed the balance of power. It turned neighborhoods into data-friendly space that could be mapped and compared. A small sign helped turn cities into something governments could finally read. And once governments could read cities clearly, they could shape them far more deeply than